Ruler School is brought to you by Happy Little Hug Factory and these amazing patrons. Extra special thank you to guest lecturer patrons Brody Harris and Lance Albertson. Thank you for your support. Enjoy the video.
Welcome back to the Tournament Report this week with yours truly, Paul Reissmann. And today we're going to be talking about the WGPQ in Minnesota this past week. This is coming up a little bit later, mostly because I'm in grad school, super busy, and so this had to come out a little bit later. But as always, we're going to get right into it with the ruler breakdown. So we're going to be doing this a little bit differently than we had in the past. I'm actually going to give you the entire tournament, and then I'm going to give you the top 8 breakdown. So there were about 84 people in Minnesota. I was told by Jeremy that there were about 90, I think it was 97 total players that were registered, but only 84 showed up. We're looking at 13 Time Spinning Witch, 12 Kirik, 9 Brunhild, 9 Lucifer, 8 Chimimi, 8 Gil, 7 Ayu, 6 Isis, 5 Imel, 3 Loki, 3 Tigris, 2 Scarlet, and then 5 other singleton rulers. So that's a pretty big pie. That's a pretty huge diversity for the game. Really excited to see that. And then of course we have the top 8 breakdown, which was 3 Chimimi, 2 Ayu, 1 Kirik, a Gil, and 1 Time Spinning Witch. These are not in order of their placement, of course, but these are the totals in the top 3. Chimimi having a pretty decent conversion rate there of originally having only about 8 and then having 3 in the top 8. That's really, really good. And as always, we're going to get right into the top 8 deck lists. Of course, we're going to be doing this a little bit differently for those of you who have just joined the game this past cluster with New Valhalla, and we're going to kind of give you a breakdown for some of the rulers that are either new or have not been seen too much due to just there not being a lot of them in the meta over here in America or in general. So we're going to take a look at the Time Spinning Witch first. Now, of course, the Time Spinning Witch is one of those really special rulers that you got if you bought 3 boxes of Winds of the Ominous Moon. That's not the case if you didn't buy boxes like I did. I had to buy mine through TCG Player. And you know, if you don't have this card, if you don't have the ability to play this ruler, that's totally okay. But this is one of the best rulers in the game right now because it has the ability to produce will, and you can only spend that will to play activate abilities, to pay mobilize costs, or to awaken effects of chance. Now, chance is really important. That means you can't play things like Fenrir or the new Scarecrow that Loki gets. You can't do that, unfortunately. That would be too broken, and then Loki wouldn't have a reason to exist. You can only play that ability once per turn, and you would say this is pretty restrictive, like this is probably really balanced. Yeah, it's really balanced, but that's still a lot of stuff that it can do. On its flip side, it becomes an 8/12 flying with barrier. If you have 10 stones, you can do judgment into its flip side. We're not going to talk about that today because no one really does it. And on the flip side, you can produce 2 Time Will instead of just 1, all for the same restrictions. And then her God's Art says that you can basically reset the number of God's Arts that you've used in the game. And we're going to be talking about why that's relevant. It's actually a God's Art that doesn't make much sense outside of the context of not having other God's Arts. So, now that we have the Time Spinning Witch broken down in terms of her ruler and J-ruler side, we are going to be taking a look at some of her support for those of you who do not know what any of this stuff is because you don't have the Time Spinning Witch or haven't seen it. Well, the main card that she's going to be playing is the Distortion of Time. Now, it's a decent draw spell. You just look at the top card of your deck and you can put it on the bottom and draw a card. It's a basic foresee effect, but then the God's Art is what's really, really good. If it's in the graveyard, you can play the God's Art and you remove it from the game and from your graveyard is what I'm saying. And then your opponent skips their next recovery phase and you can only play the effect on your turn. Now, why this is important is, and if you haven't realized it already, if your opponent taps out, they don't untap next turn because you are just going to spring the Distortion of Time. And because this is a God's Art, the Time Spinning Witch's God's Art helps to reset it so you can use it multiple times a game. But that's just one of the chants that the Time Spinning Witch has in her arsenal. We also have Dinosaur Surfacing. And you're going to say, well, that's a little strange. Why would you be playing dinosaurs in the Time Spinning Witch? Well, let's just take a look at the card first. So you can search your deck for a dinosaur for 1. That's pretty decent already. Honestly, enforceable tutoring cards are not that good unless they, you know, replace themselves or something. But the Awakening is what's really, really good. So basically for 3, if you have the Time Spinning Witch flipped to her J-Ruler's side, you can pay 3 to play any dinosaur from your deck. Seems a lot better. I'd pay 3 for that. I could play things like Mosasaurus, which when it enters the field, I choose one of the effects. I can target a rested resonator and destroy it, or I can target 3 magic stones that won't recover. So you're starting to see the pattern here. So you have Distortion of Time that stops your opponent from recovering, and then you have Mosasaurus, which says 3 magic stones don't recover during your opponent's recovery phase. Now that's pretty darn good, especially considering if your opponent skips their recovery phase, the Mosasaurus effect stacks. That's really, really important to note. So you might have multiple turns where you don't have stones if you don't play against this deck right. And of course, some variants might be running Dino Rider as a way of just burning the field for 6, and if you kill something, you have a 14/14 with Swiftness, all for 3 will, which is pretty darn good. In addition to that, the other bread and butter spell of the deck is the Dragon Lord's Breath. This has multiple awakenings. It was designed to work with the Time Spinning Witch on either of her sides. It's a bounce spell for anything that's 3 or less, but you could also put a target resonator, another target resonator, on the bottom of its owner's deck, and if you want to awaken it a 3rd time, or you want to play another effect, you can draw a card. So it replaces itself, and it bounces 2 resonators, putting 1 on the bottom of the deck and 1 in the hand, which is really, really good. All for 1 will plus the awakening cost. That's all really, really solid stuff. And then of course we have things like the Idol of Magic, which if you pay 1 into the activate ability there, you can banish the card to produce a will of any attribute that you would like, and then you get to draw a card based on its 2nd effect. Now because this is an activate ability, Time Spinning Witch can actually use her Time Will to plug into the Idol of Magic, and you get will of any color that you can use for anything that you want. Probably the most optimal color you're going to want to use is either black or green. Most decks are going to run green at this point because we don't have dual stones anymore. But in addition to that, you have Angel Statue of the Tower, and this card is a little bit more permanent, which is why it's 2 costs instead of a 1 cost. Basically, it will enter the field, it will cantrip, draw you a card, and then you can tap it and use the Time Spinning Witch's will production ability to produce a will of any attribute, and it doesn't go away, so that's really, really nice as well. And of course, all of this is to help filter into cards of a different attribute, because Time Spinning Witch is one of the very few decks that can splash multiple colors in this meta. Things like Viola, Treacherous Maiden are really good cards to run if you're running a green variation of this list. Most variations are going to be green at this point, just because they're, the green cards are very, very good in this set. Viola is really strong because she can make your Mosasaurus fly for 17 damage. And that's a +2/+2 flying and becoming a dragon. So just be careful of Heaven Sundering Dragon Palm from your Keurig opponents, who are going to be able to just kill any of your Mosasaurus without any real issue. And then of course it's good against the Time Spinning Witch herself, so if you're playing the Mirror Match, you can banish this card to remove the Distortion of Time in your opponent's graveyard, so that way they can't activate their effects and stop your recovery phase. To that regard, it's also good against a lot of other decks, including Gil, Keurig, and a few others that are really graveyard dependent. So Viola is actually a really decent resonator to play right now. It's got quick cast, which is very different from most of the resonators that we're seeing. Most resonators do not have quick cast, but some of them do in Wind, so that seems to be one of those new attributes that are being attributed to certain colors as opposed to others. Another green card that would be really, really good to run in Time Spinning Witch decks is Lorite. Now, Lorite has gotten a lot of hate. It's a meme at this point, but Lorite in itself is, it's been kind of said that it needs to be in the meta just because of some really crazy stuff. Lorite is a very powerful card. It stops all of the activate or automatic abilities that your opponent puts on the chase. That includes the Time Spinning Witch's God's Art effect, not her will production effect, because will production effects don't use the chase. That's very important to remind yourself. That's the same thing with Gil, the Gifted Conjurer. His will production effects do not go onto the chase, they just happen. But his search effect can be negated by Lorite because it goes on the chase, and effects on the chase do not have barriers, so just keep that in mind. Lorite's really, really useful right now, especially against the Time Spinning Witch, which is why it's mandatory in the deck at this point, I would say. And then of course you have one of the new cards, the Village of the Spirited Away Koga. Now this is a 1-drop green edition, and of course you see that little 1 next to that tap symbol, which means it is an activate ability. So you can remove a target resonator you control from the game. Well, that seems a little strange. I guess we should read the second effect. You pay 2 green, which is why it's so important to have green in this list. You put a resonator from a removed area that was removed by this card into the field under its owner's control. Now, I don't know about you, but I would love to use my Mosasaurus more than once. That's all I gotta say about that. And Koga is really gonna make that happen a lot easier. We don't really have a lot of flicker effects outside of white, so this card is actually really strong. It helps you dodge removal. If your opponent's attacking into something, they try and attack into your Mosasaurus, you can remove it from the game and bring it back next turn. All of this is really cool, and I think Koga is a great addition to this deck, and in fact I think this might be one of the most important cards in the list that we're going to see a little bit later on in the video. So first place went to Ryan Miles, who was playing the Time Spinning Witch deck. Of course, you're going to see that he's playing a complement of 4 Mosasaurus, 4 Lorite, 3 of Lorite's 7 Disciples. If you really want to see what this card does, you can obviously put in the Gacha Log code, hit the link down in the description, or just wait till later in the video because we're actually going to highlight this card a little bit later. But you see all of the fundamental spells that are necessary for this deck. Beyond the Threshold of Time is a simple ramp spell. You get a stone that's unrested, and then you get to draw a card, which is all really nice. Fair spell for some nice negation. Keys' Call to stop some other automatic abilities if the 4 Lorite that you have aren't enough. And then of course Idols and Koga. In the sideboard, you're going to be seeing things like Rachel, which also works really well with Koga, being able to put her in, look at the top 3 cards of your opponent's deck, stack them in any way to disrupt their tempo. So if you're trying to disrupt your opponent's tempo by stopping their recovery phase and giving them dead draws, that seems like a really good strategy in my opinion, but don't take it from me, take it from Ryan Miles, who got first place with this list. Of course, you have a complement of Scarlet's Agony to stop oncoming aggro decks, as well as Arrow Trap, and additional cards such as Farah's Spell to continue the quick cast negation that the deck would need. One card you might be looking at that you don't recognize right away just from it being so far away is One and Only. Now, One and Only is an interesting card. When it first came out, people were very interested in what it could do. It was a very weird card. And we had Final Battle at the time, so this card saw absolutely no play whatsoever. But basically, it is a chant. It doesn't have quick cast, so you can only play it on your turn. Destroy all non-Magic Stone entities that share a name with another non-Magic Stone entity. Period. So this works for your side of the field and your opponent's side of the field. It's really good in IU decks because IU can't have cards with multiple names, the same name, multiple cards of the same name in her deck because of her own effect. But if your opponent's playing multiple Mosasaurus, playing an aggro deck, anything like that, this card might want to come in from the sideboard and do some damage. So congratulations to Ryan Miles for getting first place. If you guys want to look at this list again, check it down in the description. You can take the code off the image right here, or you can just pause the video and just net deck this thing right now. Why not? Next up, we have the newest ruler to make it into the top 8 of a GP this season anyway. We are looking at Chimimi. Now, Chimimi, for some older players who have been in the game since at least Lapis Cluster, might be looking at Chimimi and saying she's really similar to another J ruler from Lapis Cluster, Feasting, the 6 Age of Wind. Now, when she flips, she gives all of your elves +4/+4, but Chimimi is special in that she gives all of your resonators in general +4/+4. So she can be a really interesting ruler to play around with because she has a generic buff effect as well as access to runes, which I think is really cool. So what does Chimimi have to offer in terms of her support, especially some of the stuff that she got from the structure deck and put into the meta for us? So first of all, we have Fairy of the Lost Isles. Now, Fairy of the Lost Isles is basically a Tama replacement. Tama was a really good card. It basically replaced Familiar of Holy Wind from Grim Cluster as it came out in Lapis Cluster. And basically, it's just a card that comes in, it cantrips, and it can do 200 damage if it banishes itself to a target resonator your opponent controls. Generally speaking, you're not going to want to hit your own resonators. You can, of course, but you're probably going to hit your opponents. So there's a little bit of a difference here, though, because with Fairy of the Lost Isles, it definitely has more attack and defense, so that's something to take note of. It is a fairy, so in Wanderer, it's going to have a little bit more utility with the fairy archetype. It has flying, so it can deal 400 damage early on in the game, which is really, really great, especially for a more aggressive deck like Chimimi. And then it still has that banish effect to draw a card, so it's sort of splicing the two effects of Tama together in order to produce a different effect, although you still have to use a Wind Will in order to activate this effect to begin with, which is, you know, it's fine. I mean, it's a 4/4 flyer. If you get a card off of it, great. Just make sure you leave a little bit of will open so that, you know, you can actually use this card to its fullest. Next up, we have the Pygmy Hippo, which is one of the best aggro cards in green, period. When it enters, you have to reveal a beast or pay 2. If you don't, you just lose the card outright. So you're not going to be playing Pygmy Hippo in like 1s or 2s. You're going to be playing 4, and you might even be playing some other beasts, which is something we'll be talking about a little bit later in this chunk of the video. Next up, we have the 100-Eye one, which is a really decent card in general. I like to call it the Potato one because it looks like a really creepy potato that could potentially see everything around it. It's gonna let that sink in. If you don't agree with me, let me know down in the comments, but it's at least a yokai, so it's gonna work with the Yokai Festival card that you're gonna be putting in your rune deck. You can spring it out at any point, make 2 of your opponent's resonators unable to block, and then you can just swing in for game, which is really, really nice. Next up, we have Elephant Rush, which is Chimimi's master rune. You're gonna be putting this in the deck because, well, it can't be canceled, and you can only use it if your ruler is Chimimi. And basically, you just put 3 1,000 Wind Elephant Resonator tokens into the field. And of course, if you have Chimimi flip, you have 4 1,000 creatures on the field in order to be able to swing, plus the effect of Chimimi herself giving you an extra 1,200 damage on board. That's 5,200 damage all at once if every one of those attacks goes through. That's actually pretty darn good. I saw this card and I'm like, this is actually a decent card that I would like to see play, and lo and behold, it made it to the top 8 of this recent GP, which I think is really great. Another rune you're going to want to be looking at is Forest Meditation. This card is basically just a support rune. What it ultimately does is you choose up to 2. You can put a resonator from your graveyard into your hand, or you can put 2 target magic stones from your graveyard into the field, or you can draw a card. And this card works really well with the Spirit Stone magic stone that we have. If you banish the Spirit Stone, you draw a card. And then of course you can just use Forest Meditation to recycle those magic stones right back into the field and draw a card off of that too. So you're basically playing this card for free and you're drawing 3 cards off of it, which is pretty great. You know, just draw 3 cards for 2 will essentially, and then you get your stones back untapped. It's not too bad at all. And then we have other runes like Rapid Fire Me, which just deals 400 damage spread to your opponent's entire field. This is really good with cards like Sandstorm to deal an additional 200, wiping the board for 6 potentially, or even the Wind Boomerang, which does a 400 damage to the field as well. That's actually pretty great. Take a look at this card. It's pretty decent. In terms of chance, Chimimi has access to the newly unbanned Ruin Story, which is a great multimodal spell that's quick cast speed. You probably are not going to be flipping revealed stories in your extra deck face down, because the only way you can do that is if you're playing Scheherazade, and you're not because it's banned. That's why this card is unbanned. But you can put a target resonator from your graveyard into your hand, or you can make your opponent banish a resonator and this card doesn't target. So this is a good way of getting around like Karura or something like that. It's also really good to act as kind of like a pseudo cancel spell. It's a good way of canceling spells if your opponent's completely tapped out. This card's decent. It's definitely something you want to run, especially if you have access to Speaker Stones. We also have CL's familiar Mike. And so Mike is a beast, so he works with Pygmy Hippo. You can tribute him to do 400 damage to a target resonator, so if you're using Rapid Fire Me, this is a good way of getting rid of one of your opponent's resonators. But the big reason you run this card is for its first effect. When it enters the field, look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put a card from among them into your hand, and the rest on the bottom of your deck in any order. This is basically an upgraded Tama, and it digs you deeper into your deck, so there's some consistency here, which is all pretty great. And you can fish it back with things like Ruin Story, which I think is pretty awesome. And then, of course, we have Lorite 7 Disciples. This is something we talked about a little bit earlier in the video, but if you're running Lorite and you have the ability to run 7 Disciples, it's really not a bad idea to just put it in the deck. If you have Lorite on the field, it becomes a 900-900 with Swiftness, Flying, First Strike, Precision, Drain, and Barrier, which are all amazing symbol skills. And it's a little overkill, but this card is really hilarious and really fun. So some of the players that were playing Chimimi at the event who got into the top 8 was Steven Holsheiser, who got 3rd place with this list. I think it's pretty great that a new ruler got into the top 8. Chimimi is definitely seeming to be like one of the more fun rulers, especially if you want an additional aggro list that isn't in white or red, or isn't IU. What's really cool is that you get to run things like Winds of Vitality and Feyre's Spell from the previous set, so you can boost +6/+6 on anything that's on the field. And the Magic Boomerang is also really great because you can give something flying, so you can, in combination with Winds of Vitality, be doing 600 damage in the air with an additional amount based on whatever you're playing. Pygmy Hippos become 12/11s. Your fairies become 10/10s. It's kind of a hilarious card. I really love it. It also works really well in combination with Viola because she gives an additional +2/+2 and flying. So there's always that as well. Anyway, congratulations to Steven for getting 3rd place. Wow, I'm gonna start over. Anyway, congratulations to Steven for getting 3rd place. We also have Joe R, who got 5th place with Chimimi. This list looks really similar. It's all pretty much the same basic idea, although there is an additional draw engine with these resonators here. And then Stuart M got 6th place, playing a very interesting variation of the deck. And then we had Stuart M also get into the top 8 with the Chimimi list. Very similar again to the lists before this one, but congratulations to Stuart for getting 6th place. And I did want to mention the 2 IU lists that actually made it into the top 8 as well. Cal Tuma actually got 2nd place and played against Ryan Miles' Time Spinning Witch list in the final round. I'm not going to talk too much about IU because there's actually a lot you could say about this ruler and how you build these decks outside of the 7-ish souls that you would splash into the deck. There's a discard package, a removal package, and some other notable cards that do a lot against the control matchup. So in general, I'm going to leave IU for another video, but IU, if you take the time to just look at these decks and understand the intelligent ideas behind each card and why it's placed in the list itself, IU lists are very fascinating to look at, so I definitely take some time to look at these by clicking the links down in the description. And then of course we do have one Guild Gifted Conjurer list. One of the major changes in here is we're actually playing 2 Karura instead of 3 Gil Lapis, and the list is skewed more toward using Story Chants, and it has a blue stone so it could run Spinning Aqua Soul, recycling some of its vanishes, its absolute awarenesses, its 5th elements, its Feyre's spells as well. The Search Chant, that is basically Gil's flip side effect, but you're able to search out any chant you want from the deck basically, as well as the Ultra Awakening, which I think is a really fun win button for this list. In the sideboard, you're going to see One and Only once again, as well as an additional blue leaf against aggro lists. But then you also have Treachery, which gives your board +200 attack and precision. And they do not, and your resonators will not take any damage from any battle that they do to your opponent's board, which I think is interesting. I'm not necessarily sure how I feel about that card in particular. If you have, accolades to give to this card, please let me know down in the description. I'd love to talk to you about that card in particular, or any of the other things that we've talked about thus far. And outside of that, we're just going to move right into my thoughts now. Now, my thoughts are generally just the thoughts that I give based on the event, where's the meta going, and these are all just sort of like off the top of my head, based on the observations that I've seen and based on some of the evidence that I'm seeing in these lists and the trends. So, if you recall from one of my previous videos, I think this was around the time that we were looking at, it was almost World Grand Prix season, and this is sort of how I saw the meta developing. We had just gotten the rulers, we had just gotten their effects, we hadn't seen all of the runes yet, but we were doing relatively okay. At this point, we had seen all of, like I said, all of the rulers at this point, and we still had Scheherazade in the meta. Wow, have things have changed. I mean, this is basically the breakdown of the entire event at this point. I don't know if Time Spinning Witch or Gil is better at this point, but I do think the Time Spinning Witch has the upper hand because she can use Koga so well to flicker the Mosasaurus and come in and just stop stones from recovering. Those are really good. The two aggro lists besides Chimimi are Ayu and Kirik, with the possibility of some others cracking in there potentially. Decks like Tigris also have some potential, I believe. I did not see any favor, and you know, most people may be like, we're playing Black Tears a lot, we probably don't want to play favor, but there's potential I see if you switch into Chimimi. The idea that you can just produce all of these different tokens with all of these different effects, being able to play those alongside Chimimi and get a buff. Those are actually pretty decent in my opinion. You have a favor that can be resurrected from the graveyard, so that's something that I consider as well. You also can't die to the black rune that kills J rulers because you have a favor that gives itself barrier, so that's pretty nice. Just some ideas. I might be completely wrong about that, but we also have things like Imol, which I've been hyping up Imol a little bit just because of that white dork. I've been messing around with a build of this ruler. You also have Lucifer, who made some pretty impressive waves at this tournament. I'm not sure why this didn't make it in, other than I just think Time Spinning Witch might be a better control deck because it has the ability to freeze the recovery phase. That's really important for decks that are playing more on the control side of things, and there are some pretty high costed resonators and effects that Lucifer needs to accomplish in order to get through some of the win conditions he has. But of course we also have Brunhild, who's probably one of the more flexible rulers next to Chimimi probably. The ability to just bring something back from the graveyard. Her Master Rune is really, really strong in general. Brunhild's got some work. She also showed up with the Force at this tournament, but we'll have to see what the meta looks like as we continue to go forward, and as we continue to evolve into what is now the new Valhalla Cluster New Frontiers format. Very exciting. But of course, what most surprised you about this GP? I always ask a question at the end of the video because I genuinely want to know your thoughts on this event. You can answer this question or you can say something else entirely, but I definitely want to hear what you thought down in the comments below. Like, comment, and subscribe as always. Make sure you check the description so that way you get all of the lists from this event in the order by which they are 1 through 8 at this point. And of course, this has been Paul signing off, and I'll see you next time.